Welcome back to educator.com. Today we're going to look at the foreign exchange market. So here's the lesson overview here. We are going to discuss the role of exchange rates in today's global economy and why it's important. Know the difference between an appreciating and a depreciating currency. We're going to draw a supply and demand graph of the foreign exchange market. These are one of the major graphs you're going to want to know for macro. There's about like 6 or 7 graphs, so this is one of them. So make sure you understand how to do this. This is probably the last major graph that we're going to go over. So if you've been going through these lectures chronologically, this is it, the foreign exchange market here. And then we're going to identify the impact of inflation on exchange rates, understand the concept of purchasing power parity and Burgernomics. There's something called the Big Mac Index. We're going to review how the Big Mac Index actually measures purchasing power parity. And then we're going to differentiate between a floating and a fixed exchange rate regime. Most countries are going to have a floating rate, meaning that things are based on supply and demand. But we're going to see, why it might be beneficial to have a fixed exchange rate. All right, so understanding exchange rates. So in general, stuff produced in a country will be paid for in that country's currency. So when you're dealing with imports and exports, when you import to the United States, when you export to Germany, when you import to China, when you export to Brazil, all these transactions are made with differing and varying currencies. So there's going to be consequences as a result, because the amount that a yen is worth is going to be different than a dollar's worth on any given day, because most currencies are going to be floating. And again, US products will be paid out in dollars. Japanese products will be paid in yen. European products will be paid in euros, and British products will be paid in pounds. So foreign exchange markets, what are they? So it's a market in which currencies are exchanged for each other, in which exchange rates are determined. So let's just take a quick, simple quiz to get an idea if you know anything about currencies. So if you're watching this in the United States, you probably have a good idea of what a dollar is. But do you know exactly how much a euro is worth? And maybe you're watching this outside the United States and you still don't know exactly what a dollar is worth, but you know what a euro is, or yen, or any currency. So it's good to know this just as a general rule of thumb. So what amount has the highest value? Let's take a look here and rank them in order. Is it $1? So $1. Is it going to be 1 yen? Is it going to be 1 euro? Or is it going to be 1 pound? All right, well, as a general rule of thumb here, let's base everything off of $1 here. And again, because you have floating exchange rates, what I put right here might coincide with what the exchange rates are, but something between the filming of this lecture and you're watching this, something drastic could have happened. The value of the dollar could have dropped dramatically. So these are only guidelines right now, but they've been pretty much true, or what I have here has been true probably for the past maybe 5-10 years. So chances are, as you're watching this is actually true. If not, then please make a note in the comments and you can tell me that I'm wrong. But let's take a look at this. $1 is roughly, $1 equals $1. So that's pretty easy. $1 equals $1 here. Now, 1 euro, what does 1 euro equal? 1 euro is going to equal roughly approximately $1.30. I haven't checked the exchange rates today, but that's roughly where it is. What is one? I don't know exactly what 1 yen equals, but I know 1,000 yen is approximately $10. So 1 yen is going to be 10 divided by 1,000 is about a penny. Okay, and 1 pound. I was actually in the UK a couple months ago, visiting my sister and brother-in-law and niece and nephew, and I found that when you spent 10 pounds, it's a little bit deceiving, because you would think, oh, 10 pounds it's like $10, but in fact the exchange rate was closer to like $1.70, maybe $1.80 around there. So if you want to rank these in order, the most valuable item is going to be the 1 pound. The pound is definitely, 1 pound is going to give you the most buying power. And then it's going to be the euro, which wasn't always the case. The dollar actually used to be stronger than the euro, but times have changed a little bit. The dollar is making a little bit of a resurgence, but still 1 euro is going to exceed the value of a dollar, a euro. And then you have the dollar, and then you have the yen. So that's the general ranking in terms of currency. So the foreign exchange market, let's take a look at this here. When the euro was first introduced, $1 equals approximately 1 euro. So what has happened since? Okay, so show using the quantity of US dollars on the x-axis and euros per dollar on the y-axis. So let's draw out this graph here. And so if you're confused by these exchange rates here, make sure you have the labeling of the graphs right. You might be able to get a point for correctly labeled graphs here. That's one of the things on the FRQs you're always going to see. Draw a correctly labeled graph. So I'm going to show you how to draw a correctly labeled graph for the foreign exchange market here. So if you're doing quantity of dollars, then on the y-axis, it's going to be something per dollars because you're measuring the quantity of US dollars. So whatever the foreign currency is, euros per dollar, whatever the exchange rate is here. And so let's label this here as the demand, and here as the supply here. So S1, and this equilibrium here, let's label this E1. Here's the exchange rate, and here's Q1 here. So E1, let's say this was 1 euro. So E1, let's put it to the side here. So let's say that E1 equals 1. Right here. So what has happened since show using? Now, we know that a dollar or a euro is now roughly $1.30. So E2, let's say, is going to be something. So what is $1 worth now? It's about, let's say, about 0.8 euros. Okay, it's maybe a little bit in between 0.8 and 0.9, but let's just say 0.8. So E2 is going to be somewhere down here. So let's say, so basically, something happened here, and again, the explanation as to why the dollar has depreciated here is that the demand for the dollar has decreased. For whatever reason, people have demanded the dollar less here, and that has caused the dollar to depreciate. So $1 equals 1 euro, but now you have $1 equals 0.8 euros. Okay, so what you have here is a situation where the dollar doesn't buy as much as it did before. So this is bad for US travelers to Europe. Now, this is bad for U.S. travelers to Europe because let's say you have $1,000 that you want to take to Europe. Well, you used to be able to exchange 1,000 euros. Now you only get 800 euros, so it's not good. But at the same time, this is good for U.S. businesses. Okay, now why is this good for U.S. businesses? The same concept here, except instead of you traveling here, your goods are traveling. So imagine a European country is wanting to buy your good. It used to be $1,000 because they charge in European currency. 1,000 euros equals $1,000. But with the currency change, now your price is still $100 or $1,000, but now in Europe it's only 800 euros. So you're making the same amount of money, but you're profiting from the depreciation of currency. So again, these are two things here. Again, there are other consequences, but one thing that you want to know is that a depreciating currency is bad for a traveler to other countries because your dollar buys less, but a depreciating currency is actually good for your business in the sense that now your products seem a lot more attractive compared to more expensive foreign products using that currency. Now let's just flip it around here. So this is the exact same question, except now I'm asking something from the perspective of the euro here. So when the euro was first introduced, 1 euro equals approximately $1. So what has happened since? Show using quantity of euros on the x-axis and now dollars per euro on the y-axis. Now instead of euros per dollar, now you're measuring on the x-axis euros. So now you're dealing dollars per euro. So how does that look here? So you have the demand currency here. So this is the quantity of euros. And here you have dollars per euro. Okay, and then you have the supply of currency. And let's label this E1 here. And this is Q1 here. And what I said before here, E1, let's say, equals $1. Okay, so let's look at the final result. So today, what I said is that, E2 here, 1 euro. So 1 euro is going to be roughly $1.30. Okay, so what ended up happening is that what used to be you're a European traveler to the United States, you brought a euro. Now, you say you had €1,000. You're in France and you're traveling to New York and California, and you budget $1,000 that you could spend on restaurants, on going to amusement parks, on doing whatever. You bought €1,000, and now you exchange $1,000 when the system was currently set into place. Fast forward later on, now you bring €1,000, and you can now buy $1,300 worth of stuff. So the euro has strengthened. So the euro has appreciated from that perspective. So E2 would be somewhere right here. And so the dollar has depreciated, but the euro has appreciated. So the demand for the euro has increased. So on this graph here, the demand curve shifts to the right. Whereas if you're looking at the perspective of the dollar, the demand curve will have shifted to the left and has depreciated. But clearly here, the euro has appreciated. And it makes sense. If you appreciate something, then if you appreciate somebody, then it has more value. So the euro has appreciated, it has more value. So how does that work for the European traveler? European travelers love it. European travelers to the US can purchase more stuff. So they get a better trip on the same exact budget. Conversely, again, you look at it, the US traveler, because it's the exact same situation, now has less benefit because the dollar is depreciated. So with a stronger foreign currency, Americans are not going to be able to afford as much outside the country. So that is the first benefit here. And but that's not necessarily a good thing with appreciated currency. European businesses now will export less because their products are now more expensive. And again, we looked at that from the perspective of the U.S. company because they benefited from a cheaper currency. European businesses now will export less because their products are more expensive relative to American businesses. Because let's take a look. Let's say you're a European business and you're selling European bobbleheads, okay? And you sell a bobblehead for, let's say, $100. Okay, so someone in the United States wants to buy that bobblehead. So previously he paid 100, or it was 100 euros. So an American consumer is going to pay $100 because it will convert to 100 euros. So he'll exchange $100 into 100 euros and be able to import into the United States. And from the perspective of Europe, you're exporting that $100 worth of goods and services. Well, let's say now that the euro is appreciated. So now a dollar now only buys, so $100 isn't worth 100 euros anymore. It's only worth maybe 80 euros. So let's say 100 euros is now $130. So that same US customer that was used to paying $100 for your bobblehead now paying $130 for the bobblehead. So that American customer, you just lost the American customer based on the exchange rate here. So yes, American travelers, they're hurt, but American businesses gain. European travelers, they love the strengthened currency, but European businesses, they are hurt from the situation. Again, that's the first impact that's going to happen. And so you have to be able to analyze how exchange rates are going to help businesses and help travelers in each of the respective countries. So let's take a look at inflation and the real exchange rates, because what I've been talking about is somewhat, it has to do with nominal exchange rates. For example, a dollar compared to €1, that was a nominal exchange rate back then. And then you have, what a dollar represents, 0.8 euros. That's a nominal exchange rate. That's what you're given at a specific time. But take a look at this here. In 1990, $1 equals 2.8 Mexican pesos. In 2010, though, $1 equals 12.8 Mexican pesos. So why is this the case? And the reason why is that inflation in Mexico was much higher than US inflation. So basically, the real exchange rate is kind of reflected. So basically, you can argue that the exchange rate hasn't changed at all, even though clearly it has, because it has to do with inflation. So real exchange rates take into account the impact of inflation in both countries. So real exchange rate equals Mexican pesos per US dollar times the price in the United States divided by the price in Mexico. So that takes into account inflation to try to cancel that effect out. So when economists deal with exchange rates, real interest rates are more useful for a comparison than our nominal exchange rates. So the current account responds only to changes in the real exchange rate, not the nominal exchange rate. Very similar to nominal GDP versus real GDP. You want to keep it real. You don't want to keep it nominal. Okay, you want to keep it real. So real GDP, real exchange rate, real interest rates, that's what is taken into account. So you want to strip away the impact that inflation has on the numbers here. However, it will still make sense, however, to hold onto currency with lesser inflation. So kind of based on this, if you hold all your currency in pesos, then if you plan on traveling, well, you kind of want to make sure you don't want to hold on to the country's currency that has a higher rate of inflation. Otherwise, you might get burned. So if you're planning on traveling to Mexico and you want to hold on to pesos for a future trip, then that peso actually might have a little bit less value because the inflation rate is higher in Mexico than it would be in the United States. All right, so let's use a term called purchasing power parity, or PPP. What that means here. So it's a useful tool for analyzing interest rates. It's a concept known as purchasing power parity here. So the purchasing power parity, or PPP, is between two countries' currencies, is the nominal exchange rate at which a given basket of goods and services would cost the same amount in each country. So let's take a look at this. So if you're in one country, now obviously the standard of living is going to vary, in large amounts from the United States to Mexico to Zimbabwe to Venezuela to Russia. Obviously the standard of living is going to be a lot different. More people are going to be maybe wealthier in one country than another. But the idea is that if you give $100 or whatever the exchange rate is, $100 in the other country's currency, the idea of purchasing power parity is that they're going to still be able to buy the same amount of items. So let's say in $100 in the United States, $100, let's say will buy you, 10 shoes. Well, let's say the exchange rate, a dollar equals, let's say a dollar equals 2 pounds. So 50 pounds would be able to get you those same exact 10 shoes that you got in the United States at $100. 50 pounds and $100 are the same thing. So that's this idea of the purchasing power parity. So again, in theory, you should be able to buy $100 worth of stuff in any country. So what I said before here, for example, if 1 pound equals $2, then $100 in the United States should buy the exact same amount of stuff that $50 or 50 pounds would get you in the UK. So this is a purchasing power parity. It's not exactly what happens in real life, but over the long run, purchasing power parities do a good job of predicting the nominal exchange rate. So if you have a situation where you're able to buy a lot more in one country than another country, then you can argue that things would eventually, the nominal exchange rates is going to eventually equilibrate back to this purchasing power parity. So again, what this saying is that over the long run, in the short run, it might not happen, but in the long run, if you're a currencies trader and you want to figure out what are overvalued currencies versus undervalued currencies, it's a good idea to have the purchasing power parity data available so that you can make informed decisions on which currencies you want to bet on, so to speak. So let's take a look at Burgernomics. What is Burgernomics? Sounds like kind of an invented term, and it's actually quite a recent phenomenon. The Big Mac Index was first published in 1986 as the example of purchasing power parity, using the Big Mac as the benchmark. So rather than a whole basket of goods that can be bought in one country versus another country, because McDonald's is so global in its scope, they use the Big Mac as the one single unit of goods. So again, at the time, it may have seemed to be created in jest, but over the years, so every January, The Economist will come out with these numbers on how much an average Big Mac costs in over 100 countries. Now, obviously, it's not the best measure. For example, Argentina is not included because it did not want to be part of the 100+ countries on the list. Maybe because they were ashamed about some of the inflation that was going on, or maybe they want to control the interest rates a little bit more, but they were not included in the Big Mac Index. And in India, $1.54 Big Mac. It's really cheap, but is it really a Big Mac if it's made of chicken? So again, you have to call into question, there are certain glitches in using just one item to measure purchasing power parity. But again, for just one item, the Big Mac does a heck of a good job in valuing, what currencies might be overvalued and what currencies might be undervalued. And this is the data that was found here. In 2014, a Big Mac in the US sells for $4.62. Which is remarkably close to what it costs in the United Kingdom at $4.63. So again, what purchasing power parity, the theory says that that's about right. So, what you find in the United States, you go to the UK, the currencies are pretty much exactly where it should be, according to purchasing power parity. Now, a couple of countries where you might think twice about living and moving to, let's say you sell your house, you sell everything that you have, and you liquidate all your life savings, and let's say you have $1 million. Where can you get the best value for your $1 million? These are the countries you want to avoid going to, because that dollar theoretically won't buy you that same amount of goods and services in these countries, again, according to just one single item, which is a Big Mac. So stay away from Norway, Sweden, Denmark, Brazil, and Switzerland. So again, the reverse works as well. If you're in any of these countries and you want to, buy more with the money that you have, you can move to the United States because you get a cheaper Big Mac in the United States than in these countries. Similarly, if you're wanting to build up your wealth in the United States, liquidate them into assets and move to other countries based on this Big Mac Index, then you might want to consider going to the following countries. Okay, you might want to consider the Chinese yuan, so you might want to go to China. The Russian ruble, so you can pack up and go to Sochi. You might want to go to South Africa, the rand, very cheap Big Macs, the Mexican peso, and the Indian rupee. So these are kind of the 5 countries where the Big Mac is really cheap. So if you had a large amount of US currency, then theoretically you could purchase more stuff in these countries than you could in the United States, right? And what really is money? Money is what can you get behind the purchasing power of money? So certain countries You may have a higher standard of living, etc. But if you can use the money you have and you get a better value, then technically your standard of living could be higher than what the country's standard of living is. So here's the full measure of the Burgernomic Index for the year 2014. And again, what I said here, to kind of give you the idea here, the overvalued countries, Norway, Switzerland, Brazil, the Euro area. You're not going to get a really good deal on Big Macs here. So the United States of America, this is a base country. Yeah. Places that you want to go. So if you want to find, let's say you had a free ticket to anywhere in the world and time was of no value to you, and you just wanted to get the best deal on Big Macs, then you'd start off going to Hong Kong. It's kind of very interesting. So Hong Kong is somewhere that you might want to fly to first in order to get a Big Mac. Again, something that you might not expect, but that is the case. China, Thailand, Malaysia, the Philippines, Russia, Taiwan, South Africa, and Mexico. These are places where, you know, the dollar will go further than the local currency. All right, so we'll take a brief look at the difference between a fixed and floating exchange rate. What a fixed exchange rate is exactly that. So when the government keeps the exchange rate against some other currency at or near a particular target. Usually it's not something where they'll directly come in and say, you know, dollar equals €1, but they're going to artificially, you know, use supply and demand to artificially get to a target rate, so to speak. This is what Hong Kong does. And they set an exchange rate of Hong Kong $7.80 to $1, which is maybe why you see the situation where the Big Mac is relatively the cheapest in Hong Kong. So if you're investing in currencies based on this, you might invest in the Hong Kong dollar. Okay, so through manipulation of supply and demand, these are, you know, countries can basically, you know, fix this exchange rate. So that's how the countries can fix exchange rate. So they're not actually saying this is what it equals to. They're actually using a lot of reserve currency to try to get to this equilibrium target here. Now, what are floating exchange rates? So floating exchange rates is exactly what it is. It floats anywhere supply and demand takes it here. So this is an exchange rate that goes where the market takes it. For example, the United States, UK, Canada, China notoriously is not on this list. Maybe they're a little bit too scared to see where the market is going to take its currency. So China actually expends a lot of its energies manipulating the markets to get the currency to where it wants to get it at. They've kind of loosened it a little bit more towards market controls, but they definitely don't have a floating exchange rate. It's a little bit closer to a kind of a basket of items in which their exchange rate can peg towards, but it's definitely not a floating exchange rate. So a floating exchange rate is what most countries have, but in a fixed exchange rate, if the equilibrium is lower than the target rate, like what's kind of considered to be the prime example of a fixed exchange rate in China, the government will buy currency to prop it up. Okay. Conversely, if the equilibrium is higher than the target rate, the government will sell the currency to keep it from rising. So again, this is what happens in a fixed exchange rate regime, whereas in a floating exchange rate, again, the market forces just take it to wherever it goes. So you can look at the exchange rate graph. You know, if there's a demand for a particular currency, if that increases, then the currency appreciates. If the demand decreases, then the currency depreciates. So here's the exchange rate dilemma here. So fixed rate regimes gives predictability to trade partners as business within the United States operates as such. What does that mean? Well, if you travel from Florida to California, guess what? You have you have a fixed exchange rate. A dollar in California is exactly the same as a dollar in Florida. So there's no variation. It makes business a lot easier to conduct when you're dealing with the same currency. And this was the idea behind the European euro. So European countries adopting the euros, for example, Italy, France, Germany. The most notable country not to join the European Union was Great Britain. They still maintain their own currency of the pound. But again, every choice has a cost. Okay, nothing is free. Every decision that's made, there's going to be a consequence. Well, what's the problem with having a fixed exchange rate? Well, countries keep large quantities of foreign currency on hand at low return. So there's an opportunity cost. So you're holding on to money that could be used for other productive resources, but it's kept just so that you can manipulate the currency. Okay. Similar, monetary policy is diverted to maintaining exchange rates. So you're expending all this energy and effort and changing this and that to get the exchange rate to where you want it to be. Again, that's very taxing on the government to do when it could use its resources for other productive activities. And you give up monetary policy. So if you have the fixed exchange rate, which is what you had in Europe, Europe countries did in adopting the euro, now you don't really have control of how you want to change the how you want to implement monetary policy. Your hands are kind of tied. So that's some of the problems with having a fixed exchange rate. So again, most countries have opted to using this floating exchange rate, where the value of their currency kind of just floats to where the market takes it. If you fix your exchange rate, like what Argentina did with the United States, there's some short-term benefits to that, obviously, but when they tie their currency to another currency and they fix that amount, then you have a problem, because some of the advantages of having a depreciated currency, you didn't get that situation with Argentina, because they had a relatively strong currency when neighboring countries were benefiting from a lower depreciated currency. So let's take a look at example number 1 here. If a dollar equals 1,001, which is the current currency in 2014, but a dollar equals 801 in 2015, which of the following has occurred? All right, so let's take a look at these answer choices. Again, I want to try to practice test-taking skills as much as I do with teaching you macroeconomics, because chances are you're watching this, you want to get that 5 on the AP exam, and that's my goal for you too as well. The dollar and the won have both appreciated. Okay, let's cross that out here. The dollar and the won, since they're two different currencies trying to equal each other, they both can't appreciate. If one appreciates, the other depreciates. When you're only dealing with two currencies, then one will appreciate versus depreciate here. So the dollar and won have both depreciated. That is also incorrect here. All right, so if a dollar equals 1,000 won, but now you buy less won, now you only can buy 800 won, the dollar has depreciated. Okay, so 1,000 won used to buy $1, now 1,000 won buys $1.20. So the dollar has depreciated and the won has appreciated here. So the answer is D. The dollar is depreciated, but the won has appreciated. So C is wrong. But if you didn't know that, again, you can kind of cross out the answer choices that don't make sense at all. Example number 2. On a foreign exchange market graph, what happens if capital flows from Europe, euro to dollars, to the United States if that's increased? Has the dollar appreciated or depreciated here? Okay, so if capital flows comes in from Europe, then what happens in the foreign exchange market? So let's go ahead and take a look here. So here's the demand. Again, this is a quantity of dollars. And here's the euro per dollars. Here's the supply. Let's label this as E1 here and Q1 here. So if capital flows from Europe has increased, so what's going to happen is that the demand for the currency is going to increase here. So you have D2 here. Has the dollar appreciated or depreciated? Okay, so if capital flows comes in, then the dollar has appreciated. So let's take a look at example number 3. All right, so using a very similar example here, but on a foreign exchange market graph, what would happen if there's an increase in U.S. demand for imports from Europe? Has the dollar appreciated or depreciated here? So let's take a look at the demand here, and here's the quantity of dollars. And this is the euro per dollars. And you have the supply of US dollars. And you have E1 here. So if there's an increase in US demand for imports, what has happened to the dollar? Well, if there's an increase in demand for imports from Europe, then the supply of dollars is going to have increased because more dollars are flowing into that. The supply of dollars is increasing into the foreign country. So supply has increased here. So E1 goes to E2. So has the dollar appreciated or depreciated? So the dollar, so increase in supply leads to a depreciated dollar. So instead of a dollar being a euro, now it's going to be about 80 cents to a euro because the dollar has depreciated, and so or a dollar can only buy 0.8 euros. So that's basically what happens when there's an increase in supply in the foreign exchange market. Okay, finally, example number 4 here. Which of the following is a benefit of a fixed exchange rate regime? As I mentioned before, the world is pretty much a floating exchange rate regime, and we're probably not going to go to this fixed exchange rate regime anytime soon that I'm aware of. But again, you can see there would be huge potentials for problem if all the countries of the world decided to use one currency. It sounds great in theory. It makes travel a lot easier, but you cede a lot of ability to do a lot of things. You can kind of see history in the past couple of years, in the past decade or so. You take a look at Greece and Italy and their inability to really control their own monetary policy because they've ceded control of currency to the European Union, and so they no longer have control of their destiny. They've given up some of their sovereignty as a country. So can you imagine if we had one world currency? Let's say we all went to Bitcoin. If we all went to one currency, one world currency, that would make it a lot easier in terms of traveling, but a lot of these countries would be giving up their independence, and there could be some scary implications just from an economic perspective if we all had one currency. So that being said, what is one good thing about having a fixed exchange regime? Certainty about the value of domestic currency, and that is the answer right there. So we can kind of put that right there, but let's go ahead and review the other choices as well. Commitment to inflationary policies. No, I mean, that's not one of the benefits. Okay, no need for foreign exchange reserves. Well, if you do have a fixed exchange rate policy, one of the things that's key is having a lot of your own currency to be able to buy or to sell. Allows unrestricted use of monetary policy. No, it's the opposite. You now have no use of monetary policy, or all of the above. That's not true. So the correct answer is A. The good thing about a fixed exchange rate regime is that the certainty about the value of domestic currency is not really called into question. You can take a look at that and say, wow, a dollar equals 1 euro, and that's the way it is. But in today's day and age, you have rapidly changing currency, but that's, you take the good with the bad. So again, a depreciated currency is going to benefit an American business. So depreciated dollar, American business is going to love that, but the American traveler is going to suffer. Conversely, a depreciated dollar means an appreciated euro, so the European traveler to the US is going to benefit, but the European business is going to suffer. Thank you for watching educator.com.